Why does the exact same event ruin one person's day and barely register for another? A flight gets delayed 2 hours. One traveler is calm, pulls out a book, orders a coffee. Another is furious, pacing, telling the gate agent this is unacceptable, as if the airline made a personal promise to them and broke it. Same delay, same gate, same 2 hours lost. Wildly different suffering. The difference was never the flight. It was what each of them expected the day to look like before the day had a chance to answer back. Almost everyone believes their unhappiness comes from their circumstances, the traffic, the coworker, the relationship, the bank account. The Stoics argued something far less comfortable and far more useful. Most of that pain is not coming from life itself. It is coming from the gap between what you expected and what actually happened. A gap you built yourself, usually without noticing you were building it at all. This is the story of that gap, why your mind keeps constructing it automatically, and exactly what 3 Roman-era Stoics did to close it. 2,000 years separate the traveler at the gate from the Stoics who first wrote this down, and the mechanism has not changed even slightly in that entire span. Different props, same machinery. A delayed chariot instead of a delayed flight. A broken promise from a business partner instead of a broken promise from an airline app. The identical gap doing the identical damage generation after generation. Largely because almost nobody was ever taught to look for it directly. Disappointment feels like something that happens to you. In reality, it is something you manufacture in 2 separate steps, both invisible, both nearly instant. Step 1, you form a prediction. Not consciously, not deliberately, just a quiet assumption running in the background. The meeting will go well. Your partner will remember the date. The promotion is basically yours. You rarely notice this step happening because it does not feel like a guess. It feels like the default setting of reality itself. Step 2, reality arrives, and your mind compares it against the prediction, not against some neutral baseline, against the specific version you had already quietly decided was owed to you. If reality matches or exceeds the prediction, you feel fine, sometimes even relieved. If it falls short even slightly, you feel wronged, as though something was taken from you that you actually had a claim to. Here is the part that changes everything once you see it. The event itself was neutral information. The suffering was entirely generated in step 2, in the comparison, in the gap. 2 people can experience an identical outcome, a delayed flight, a missed promotion, a lukewarm birthday, and one of them suffers considerably while the other barely notices, purely because their step 1 predictions were different sizes. You cannot always control step 1, the event. You have far more control than you think over step 2, the size and shape of the expectation you built before the event ever happened. This is easy to test in your own memory. Think of the last time you were genuinely, disproportionately upset by something small. A slow reply, a cold meal, a canceled plan. Almost every time, if you trace it back honestly, you will find a specific, unspoken prediction sitting underneath the anger. A prediction you never said out loud, maybe never even consciously formed, but were nonetheless quietly relying on as though it had been guaranteed to you in writing. Before any important event, your brain does something strange. It runs a simulation. A quiet, detailed movie of how the thing is supposed to go. The birthday dinner, the job interview, the vacation, the conversation with your father, complete with a script, a tone, sometimes even a soundtrack. This simulation feels harmless, even helpful, like preparation. Mostly it is not preparation. It is a silent contract you are signing with reality. One reality never agreed to and was never even shown. Notice how specific the movie gets. Not just a nice vacation, but a particular kind of nice, sunny every day. No arguments, the relaxation you have been picturing for months. Not just a good birthday, but everyone remembering, everyone showing up on time, the exact gift you were hoping for without having to ask. The more detailed the movie, the larger the surface area for reality to disappoint you, because reality was never given the script and has no obligation to perform it. This is why anticipation can quietly poison an experience before it even starts. You are not walking into the vacation. You are walking into a comparison between the vacation and the movie, being edited entirely by your own hopeful imagination, almost always wins. The fix is not to stop hoping for good things. It is to notice when hope has quietly hardened into a script, a specific, detailed, unspoken demand for exactly how the day must unfold, and to loosen your grip on that script before reality even gets a turn to speak. Athletes who train sports psychology learn a version of this on purpose. They visualize the performance, but the good ones visualize obstacles inside that same performance. A bad call, a slow start, a cramp in the third mile, precisely so the obstacle does not arrive as a betrayal of the plan when it eventually shows up. Most people only run the highlight reel version of the visualization, which quietly guarantees that any deviation from the highlight reel will feel like a personal failure rather than like an ordinary Tuesday doing what ordinary Tuesdays do. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth, buried children, fought wars on the frontier for over a decade, and still managed to write, in his private notebook, one of the calmest sentences ever recorded by anyone with that much power. Approach each day expecting friction, ingratitude, arrogance, and dishonesty from people. Because that is simply what many people do, and nothing about it should surprise you or ruin your morning. Read quickly. That sounds bleak, almost cynical. Read carefully. It is the opposite. Marcus was not teaching himself to expect the worst so he could suffer in advance. He was teaching himself to expect realistically, so that ordinary friction stopped functioning as a personal insult against him specifically. This is the core move. Lower the specificity and rigidity of your expectations, not your hopes, your rigid predictions, and disappointment loses most of its fuel. If you expect a colleague might be short with you today, and they are, nothing violated. If you expect them to be warm and they are short, you spend the next 2 hours privately furious at a debt they never actually agreed to owe you. Marcus was not asking anyone to stop caring or stop trying. He ran an empire. He clearly cared. He was separating the effort, which he controlled completely, from the outcome and the other person's behavior, which he never controlled at all. Put your full effort into the day. Release your grip on exactly how the day, or the people in it, are supposed to respond. Consider what that morning routine actually cost him to write. This is a man who could have woken up expecting flattery, obedience, and comfort, and largely received it because he was, functionally, the most powerful person alive. He chose the harder, more honest prediction anyway, not because he expected the worst of everyone, but because a realistic baseline meant nothing that actually happened that day could catch him by surprise or knock him off the work he had planned to do. Epictetus made one of the most useful distinctions in the entire philosophical tradition, and he made it as a former slave who had genuinely lost control of nearly everything a person can lose control of. It is not events that disturb people, he wrote, it is their judgments about events. Notice the two separate things happening whenever you get disappointed. First, the event, the delayed flight, the unanswered text, the missed deadline, entirely neutral, entirely outside your authority. Second, the verdict, this is unacceptable, this shouldn't be happening to me, I deserve better than this, which you supply yourself instantly, automatically, and almost never examine. Expectations are exactly where the verdict gets manufactured. An expectation is a private rule about how the world is supposed to behave. And every time the world breaks that private rule, your mind reads it as an offense rather than as simply one outcome among many possible outcomes. The event did not disturb you. Your own unexamined rule about the event did. Epictetus's practical instruction was almost embarrassingly simple. Between the event and your response to it, there is a gap, small, often less than a second, but real. In that gap sits a question worth asking every single time. Is this actually within my control? And if it is not, on what authority did I decide it owed me a different outcome in the first place? This is not about pretending disappointment never happens. It is about noticing that the disappointment is arriving from your verdict, not directly from the world, and a verdict, unlike the world, can actually be rewritten. Epictetus had unusually strong grounds to test this claim on himself. He was enslaved for a significant part of his life. At one point, had his leg deliberately broken by his master, and reportedly commented on it with something close to detachment, noting only that the leg was now broken, without adding a second, self-authored layer of outrage on top of an injury he had no power to prevent. Almost nobody watching this video will face anything close to that level of hardship, which makes the same discipline applied to a late reply or a canceled plan considerably more available than it might first appear. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, advisor to an emperor, practiced something that sounds almost superstitious until you understand the mechanism behind it. He deliberately imagined loss before it happened. His fortune, his position, his health, even his life, rehearsed in his mind in advance, on purpose, regularly. This practice has a name now, premeditation malorum, the premeditation of adversity, and it is not pessimism. It is closing the exact gap this video has been describing from a different direction. Instead of lowering your expectation of a single event, you rehearse the full range of outcomes ahead of time, including the bad ones, so that no single outcome arrives as a total violation of what you assumed was guaranteed. Seneca's argument was specific and almost mathematical. Nothing happens to the wise man contrary to his expectation, he wrote, because the wise man has already, quietly, considered that fortune grants nothing on permanent loan. The house, the job, the relationship, the body, all borrowed, none owned outright, all subject to return at a date never disclosed in advance. This is uncomfortable to sit with, and it is supposed to be. Most people avoid thinking about loss entirely, assuming that avoidance protects them from pain. It does the opposite. It guarantees that when loss eventually arrives, and it always eventually arrives, it lands as a total shock rather than as one already considered branch of a future you had rehearsed. Seneca was not teaching dread. He was teaching insurance, paid in a few minutes of honest thought against decades of unexamined assumption. There is a specific version of this worth trying tonight. Before sleep, spend 90 seconds picturing one thing you currently rely on, a job, a relationship, your own health, quietly gone. Not to spiral, and not to catastrophize the way earlier videos on this channel have warned against, but to notice, honestly, that you are currently holding something you have been treating as permanent that was never actually promised to be. Most people report the same strange result. The exercise does not make them anxious. It makes them oddly grateful for the next morning, precisely because they rehearsed a version of it that did not arrive. None of this is ancient history. It is running your life right now, in 3 specific places. Social media manufactures expectation at industrial scale. You do not just see other people's highlight reels, you quietly absorb them as the baseline, the thing a normal life is supposed to look like, and then measure your actual Tuesday against a curated montage built from someone else's best 40 seconds out of an entire year. The comparison was rigged before it even started, and almost nobody is measuring it consciously. Relationships absorb an enormous, often unspoken volume of expectation. Not the explicit ones you discuss out loud, the invisible ones, that a partner should simply know what you need without being told, that love should feel effortless if it is real, that any friction at all is proof something is fundamentally wrong. Most relationship disappointment traces back not to genuine incompatibility, but to an unspoken contract one person wrote alone and never showed the other person to sign. Careers run on the same machinery. You picture a trajectory, promoted by this age, earning this by that year, respected in this specific way by this specific date, and treat any deviation from that private script as failure, rather than as simply one path among the many that were always possible from the start. Ambition itself is not the problem. A rigid, undisclosed, overly specific script for exactly how the ambition must unfold, that is the problem, and it is a problem entirely of your own construction. In every one of these 3 places, the fix is the same one Marcus, Epictetus, and Seneca were already describing 2,000 years earlier. Keep the effort, keep the care, loosen the script. There is a 4th version worth naming separately, because it compounds the other 3. The expectation that comfort itself should be continuous. A slow internet connection, a delayed order, a mildly inconvenient wait in line, register today as small emergencies for a lot of people. Not because these inconveniences are objectively larger than what previous generations dealt with routinely, but because an expectation of near constant, frictionless convenience has quietly become the assumed baseline. Every ordinary friction now arrives measured against that inflated baseline, instead of against a more honest one, and loses badly every single time. There is a quiet word underneath most modern disappointment, and it is entitlement, not in the dramatic sense of the word, in the small, ordinary, nearly invisible sense that touches almost everyone. Entitlement is simply the belief that you are specifically owed a particular outcome, not because you earned some abstract general right to try, but because you specifically deserve this specific result. The raise, the apology, the smooth flight, the years of good health continuing uninterrupted. The moment that belief forms, quietly, without ceremony, gratitude becomes almost mathematically impossible, because you cannot feel grateful for something you had already decided was simply owed to you in the first place. Compare two mental postures toward the exact same ordinary Tuesday. In one, you woke up healthy, had food, had work, had people who would answer if you called, and none of it was guaranteed to you by anything or anyone. In the other, you woke up and some baseline of comfort was simply assumed, expected, owed, and every gap from that assumed baseline registers as a grievance rather than as the absence of something you were never actually promised. The Stoics were relentless about this distinction because they had watched fortune reverse itself constantly. Emperors exiled, slaves freed, wealthy men ruined overnight. Nothing external was ever a permanent possession. It was a loan, on no fixed schedule, and treating a loan as owned property is precisely where entitlement and the disappointment that inevitably follows it gets built. There is a simple test for spotting entitlement in yourself before it fully forms. Notice the exact language your mind reaches for in the moment of disappointment. "This shouldn't be happening" is the sound of an assumed baseline getting violated. "This is disappointing and it was never guaranteed" is the sound of the same event, registered honestly, without the invisible contract attached. The event does not change between those two sentences. Only the size of the entitlement underneath it does, and that size is entirely something you built and can, with practice, unbuild. There is a further move beyond simply lowering expectations, and the Stoics pointed toward it too, though the phrase most associated with it, Amor fati, love of fate, gets credited to a later philosopher who was clearly reading them closely. Lowering expectations reduces the size of the gap between what you wanted and what happened. Amor fati asks a more radical question. What if you stopped needing there to be a gap at all? Not by expecting nothing, and not by pretending to be happy about genuine hardship, but by training yourself to work with whatever actually arrives instead of quietly grieving the version of the day that did not. Marcus Aurelius came close to this exact idea when he wrote that the obstacle in the path becomes the path, that what stands in the way of the action actually advances the action, not a wish for suffering. A refusal to let unexpected events be treated automatically as enemies of the plan, when they could just as easily be treated as the new current material the plan now has to work with. This is not resignation, and it is not passivity. It is the opposite of passivity. Passivity is what happens after you have spent an hour resenting the flight delay, the missed promotion, the rainy wedding day, resenting a fact that has already happened and cannot be unhappened. Working with what actually occurred, rather than mourning the version that did not, is where your actual power lives, because it is the only version of the day you were ever going to be able to influence in the first place. The rainy wedding day still gets a version of the story where the wedding happened and people who love you were in the room. The delayed flight still gets a version where you read 50 extra pages instead of scrolling. Nothing about Amor fati requires calling the rain or the delay good. It only requires refusing to let your reaction to it cost you more than the event itself already did. There is a useful distinction hiding inside this idea that is easy to miss on a first pass. Amor fati is not the same as telling yourself everything happens for a reason, a claim about the universe's intentions that the Stoics were notably careful never to make. It is a claim about your own posture toward whatever has already undeniably happened. The universe owes no explanation. You still get to choose what you build with the material it hands you, and that choice, unlike the event itself, was always fully yours. The problem was never life. Life, most days, is simply neutral, indifferent, unfolding according to no promise it ever made you personally. The suffering arrives afterward, manufactured quietly in the gap between what you expected and what actually showed up. A gap you built, almost always without noticing you were building it. You cannot control most events. You have far more influence than you think over three specific things. How detailed and rigid a script you write before the event happens. How quickly you notice, in the small gap between event and reaction, that your verdict is optional even when the event is not. And whether you treat what you currently have, today ordinary and unremarkable as it may feel, as owed to you or as something you were simply, temporarily, lucky enough to be holding. Try this today. Before your next meeting, your next conversation, your next ordinary commute home, notice the movie your mind is already quietly writing about how it is supposed to go. Then loosen the script on purpose before reality gets a chance to argue with it. None of this asks you to want less out of life. It asks you to stop quietly billing life for outcomes it never agreed to deliver, so that when something good actually happens, unscripted, unowed, it can register as the gift it always was, instead of getting swallowed instantly by whatever the movie in your head had already decided you were entitled to. If this reframed something for you, subscribe. This channel breaks down exactly this kind of thinking every week. And if you want a daily practice for catching these patterns in real time, Becoming Stoic is a free app built for exactly that.